You were taught about the Constitution, but not the time America tried to send a child through the mail, or when a goat ran for mayor and won. This isn't the land of liberty. It's the land of absolutely unhinged decisions. Welcome to the dumbest, weirdest, most facepalm-worthy facts in U.S. history. 1. You think your parents are cheap? Back in 1914, the U.S. parcel post was the hot new thing, and the rules were basically scribbled on a napkin. An Ohio couple staring at the price of a train ticket for their 4-year-old daughter had a moment of red, white, and blue genius. They realized it was cheaper to classify their child as livestock and mail her to grandma's house. So, they did. They slapped 53 cents in stamps on her little coat and handed her over to a bewildered mailman. Can you imagine that guy's day? He's delivering letters, a bill, and suddenly, a small human being. To his credit, he just rolled with it and ensured she got there. It got so popular that the government had to step in and officially declare that, no, children are not mailable, no matter how much you want to save a buck. 2. If you've ever thought modern politicians are a joke, allow me to introduce you to Mayor Klay Henry of Lajitas, Texas. He was a goat. I'm not being metaphorical. The town literally elected a beer-guzzling goat as their leader in the 1980s. His entire political platform consisted of one promise. He would drink any beer you put in front of him. And you know what? He delivered on that promise more consistently than any human politician ever has. His main mayoral duty was to get absolutely hammered for the entertainment of tourists. He never raised taxes, he never started a war, he just drank. He was, by all measures, one of the most effective and honest leaders in American history, proving that sometimes the best government is one that's too drunk to govern. 3. You've heard the phrase, if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. Well, you can thank George C. Parker, the undisputed heavyweight champion of American bull artists, for that. This guy didn't just sell the Brooklyn Bridge once, he had a booming real estate business selling it to clueless tourists, sometimes twice a week. He would print up incredibly official-looking fake deeds, talk about the massive toll revenue, and convince people they were buying into a concrete and steel gold mine. The cops had to constantly remove his new owners, who would show up trying to set up their own toll booths. This man was a legend. He wasn't just a con artist. He was living a version of the American dream where you could own anything just by having the sheer audacity to sell it. 4. In the dead center of the Cold War, America's most advanced air defense system, NORAD, was designed for one thing: detecting Soviet bombers bringing nuclear annihilation. So imagine the tension in the command center when the top-secret red phone rang. Colonel Harry Shoup picks it up, expecting to hear about World War III. Instead, it's a little kid asking if he's Santa Claus. A Sears ad had a typo and printed the direct line to potential Armageddon as Santa's hotline. Instead of hanging up, the colonel, in a moment of sheer brilliance, ordered his staff to check the radar for a sleigh. And thus, a tradition was born. America's multi-billion-dollar defense apparatus now officially spends one night a year tracking a magical fat man, all because someone at a department store couldn't proofread. 5. Driving a car in the 1930s before air conditioning was like volunteering to be slow-cooked inside a metal potato. The solution? A masterpiece of dumb engineering called the Keep-A-Cool. It was, and I'm not exaggerating, a metal box that you filled with a giant block of ice. That's it. You'd literally go to an ice house, buy a chunk of frozen water like some kind of cartoon caveman, and shove it into this contraption. A tiny fan would then blow vaguely cool, moist air in your direction for about an hour before it all melted, leaving you with a massive puddle on your floor. It was the perfect device for someone who wanted to solve the problem of being too hot by introducing the new problem of being hot and soaking wet. 6. There are certain lines you just don't cross with the American public. During World War II, the government asked for immense sacrifice. Rationing, scrap metal drives, sending sons off to war. The nation complied. But then, in 1943, they went too far. They banned pre-sliced bread. The country had a collective, nationwide aneurysm. You would have thought they'd just outlawed freedom itself. The outrage was so immediate and so volcanic, with housewives writing furious letters to the president about the structural integrity of their sandwiches, that the government crumbled. The ban was lifted in less than 2 months. It was a stunning display of people power, proving that in America you can challenge our ideals, but you do not, under any circumstances, mess with our convenience. 7. For over 100 years, many Americans lived in mortal fear of the tomato. They called it the poison apple, and believed that one bite could kill you instantly. The reason for this mass hysteria is the single dumbest rich person problem in history. The wealthy ate off of fancy pewter plates which had a sky-high lead content. Tomatoes are acidic, so when a rich guy ate a tomato, the acid would leach lead from the plate into his food, giving him lead poisoning. But instead of concluding, maybe I shouldn't eat off of toxic metal, they blamed the innocent fruit. It took the popularization of pizza, a food for the common folk who ate off normal plates, to finally exonerate the tomato and prove it wasn't a vegetable assassin. 8. In 1996, Pepsi ran an ad for its rewards program showing a kid landing a Harrier jump jet at school, with the price tag of 7 million Pepsi points listed on screen. It was a joke, an obvious, over-the-top joke. But a 21-year-old college student named John Leonard, a man who clearly operated on a different level of reality, decided to take it as a legally binding offer. He found a loophole, raised $700,000, bought the points, and sent a check to Pepsi demanding they deliver his military aircraft. What followed was a glorious legal battle where Pepsi's high-priced lawyers had to stand in federal court and argue with a straight face that, no, they are not, in fact, in the business of trading fighter jets for soda. It was a legendary moment of a smartass versus a corporation, and for a short time, we were all hoping the kid would win. 9. You know that feeling when your boss makes you do some awful team-building exercise? Now imagine your boss is the President of the United States, and the exercise is a sport he invented to torture his staff. Meet Hooverball, the brainchild of President Herbert Hoover. It was a brutal mix of volleyball and tennis, but played with a 6-pound medicine ball that could probably knock a man unconscious. Every single morning at 7 a.m., Hoover would drag his sleep-deprived cabinet members, men who were supposed to be running the country, out onto the White House lawn for this grueling ritual. He called them his medicine ball cabinet. You haven't truly experienced workplace toxicity until the Secretary of State lobs a ball of pure density at your head before you've even had coffee. 10. How do you get people to buy war bonds? You could appeal to their patriotism, or if you're the US government in the 1940s, you could just terrorize them. In a move of sheer psychological insanity, the government staged a full-blown surprise Nazi invasion of a small town in Texas. Actual soldiers dressed as German troops marched down Main Street, arrested the mayor, and took over the town. People were genuinely terrified, thinking the war had come home. Then, after scaring the living daylights out of everyone, the invaders revealed it was all a show and said, "See, this could happen for real. Now, who wants to buy a war bond?" It's the single most aggressive and unhinged fundraising tactic in history, basically holding a town's sense of security hostage for cash. 11. It's the middle of World War II. The US military is stretched thin, fighting on multiple fronts against formidable enemies. So, what did the Pentagon decide was a top priority, mission-critical strategic investment? A floating ice cream factory. That's right. They spent $1 million, a king's ransom in the 1940s, to build a concrete barge that could produce 10 gallons of ice cream every 7 minutes in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. While soldiers were storming beaches, a dedicated crew was churning out vanilla and chocolate to boost morale. This is perhaps the most American solution to a global crisis ever conceived. Forget bullets and bombs. The real secret weapon in the fight against fascism was, apparently, unlimited access to dessert. 12. Have you ever gotten so fed up with your country that you just wanted to float away from it all? Some absolute madmen in the 90s tried to make that a reality with the Freedom Ship. This wasn't a cruise liner. It was a proposed mile-long, 25-story-high floating city, complete with apartments, schools, hospitals, and its own airport on the roof. It was designed to perpetually circle the globe, a sovereign nation of the sea, untethered from any country's laws or taxes. It was the ultimate libertarian fever dream. The problem? It was a logistical and financial nightmare. Despite all the hype and grand plans, this colossal monument to running away from your problems was, predictably, never built, proving that sometimes even the most ambitious dreams sink before they ever set sail. 13. Imagine going to a fancy restaurant today and ordering the prisoner's special, and they bring you a 2-pound lobster. In colonial America, that was reality. Lobsters were so disgustingly plentiful that they were considered the cockroaches of the sea. They would wash ashore in massive, twitching piles, and people treated them like garbage. They were used as fertilizer, fish bait, and, most famously, as food for prisoners and indentured servants. It got so bad that a group of servants in Massachusetts actually sued their masters, demanding a clause in their contracts that they would not be forced to eat lobster more than 3 times a week. Let that sink in. People were so sick of eating what is now a luxury food that they took legal action to get less of it. 14. In most towns, if someone says, "There's a fire underground," it's a metaphor for political tension. In Centralia, Pennsylvania, it's the literal, decades-long reality. In 1962, someone had the brilliant idea to clean up a landfill by setting the trash on fire. Unfortunately, that landfill was located right on top of an open coal seam. They basically lit the fuse on an underground barbecue that has been burning ever since. For over 60 years, a fire has been raging beneath the town, causing the ground to crack open, spewing toxic gases, and making the place a real-life gateway to hell. The government's solution was basically to give up and pay everyone to leave. The fire is expected to burn for another 250 years, making it America's longest and dumbest self-inflicted disaster. 15. Feeling uninspired by your political choices? Well, in the 1960s, you could have voted for the Rhinoceros Party. Their presidential candidate was a rhino from a Brazilian zoo named Cornelius, and their platform was pure, unadulterated nonsense. Their core promise was to end crime by simply abolishing all laws, which, if you think about it, is technically a solution. They also promised to declare war on Saturn, claiming it was a bully, and to make their national anthem the sound of silence, so no one would have to sing it. This entire party was a satirical masterpiece, created to show how absurd politics had become. The sad part is a thick-skinned, single-minded animal who largely ignores everyone around him might have been the most qualified candidate. 16. The 1980s were a wild time, but nothing captures the decade's paranoia quite like the satanic panic over Dungeons & Dragons. A whole bunch of adults, fueled by daytime talk shows and a complete lack of understanding, became convinced that a board game played by nerds in basements was actually a recruitment tool for devil-worshipping cults. They genuinely believed that teenagers arguing over whether a magic missile could hit a troll were actually casting demonic spells and signing pacts with Lucifer. This nationwide hysteria led to news specials, book burnings, and kids having their rulebooks confiscated. It was a perfect storm of ignorance and fear, all directed at a bunch of geeks whose only real sin was having a terrible haircut and owning a 20-sided die. 17. Today, we have laws to protect people. But for a dark period in American history, some cities had laws specifically designed to punish people for being unattractive. They were called the ugly laws. And yes, they are exactly as horrible as they sound. Starting in the late 1800s, cities like Chicago and Omaha made it illegal for any person who was diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object to appear in public. Basically, if you didn't meet some bureaucrat's standard of beauty, you could be fined or jailed just for leaving your house. It was a government-mandated policy of, if you're not hot, stay inside. These laws stayed on the books until the 1970s, a testament to the fact that for a long time, America's solution to anything unpleasant was to simply make it illegal to look at. 18. In the Wild West, claiming land was serious business. The Homestead Act often required you to build a dwelling to prove you were living there. But one guy in the 1850s looked at that rule and saw not a requirement, but a suggestion with a massive loophole. So he built a tiny doll-sized house, just big enough to technically qualify as a dwelling, and attached it to the bottom of a hot air balloon. He would then float over thousands of acres of unclaimed Oregon territory, lower his miniature house to the ground, and declare, "Yep, that's my house. This is all my land now." He was a genius of malicious compliance, using a floating tiny home to try and become one of the biggest landowners in the West. You have to respect the sheer, unadulterated gall of a man who tried to claim an entire state using a flying garden shed. 19. Chicago in the 19th century had a big problem. All its garbage, sewage, and industrial sludge was flowing into the Chicago River, which then flowed directly into Lake Michigan, the city's only source of drinking water. They were literally drinking their own filth. The solution? Instead of, building a modern sewage system, the city's engineers decided on something far more insane and spiteful. They spent years building a complex system of canals and locks to physically reverse the flow of the entire Chicago River. They made the river flow backwards, away from the lake, sending their foul, disgusting waste downstream towards their neighbors in St. Louis. It was one of the most incredible engineering feats of the era, all motivated by the simple desire to make their poop someone else's problem. 20. In 1869, America became obsessed with the Cardiff Giant, a 10-foot-tall petrified man dug up on a farm in New York. Scientists, religious leaders, and thousands of paying customers flocked to see the remains of this biblical-era giant. It was hailed as a monumental discovery. The only problem? It was a complete and utter fake. The whole thing was the work of a guy named George Hull, an atheist who got into an argument with a preacher and decided to prove how gullible people were. He carved the giant out of a massive block of gypsum, aged it with acid, and buried it for a year before discovering it. He created one of the biggest hoaxes in American history just to win an argument. And the best part? Even after he confessed, people still lined up to pay to see it. 21. The 1950s were the golden age of atomic optimism, where people believed nuclear power could do anything, even power your family station wagon. Enter the Ford Nucleon, a concept car that was supposed to run on its own miniature nuclear reactor, located conveniently in the trunk. The idea was that you'd drive for about 5,000 miles, then pull into a nuclear refueling station to swap out your spent uranium core. Ford basically designed a car that was a rolling dirty bomb. Imagine getting into a minor fender bender and causing a small-scale Chernobyl in the grocery store parking lot. Thankfully, this glowing green fever dream never made it past the model stage, but it remains a terrifying and hilarious monument to an era when what could possibly go wrong wasn't a question people asked. 22. You know you've messed up when you almost nuke yourself. In 1961, a B-52 bomber carrying 2 hydrogen bombs, each hundreds of times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima, broke apart in midair over North Carolina. As the plane disintegrated, it dropped its nuclear payload. One bomb's parachute deployed, and it landed gently in a field. The other one, however, went through almost its entire arming sequence as it fell. When they found it buried in the mud, investigators discovered that 5 of the 6 safety mechanisms designed to prevent accidental detonation had failed. A single, low-voltage, notoriously unreliable switch was the only thing that stood between the entire eastern seaboard and a nuclear holocaust. The U.S. Air Force came one faulty switch away from accidentally vaporizing one of its own states. 23. If almost nuking North Carolina wasn't enough, 3 years earlier the Air Force had a practice run in South Carolina. In 1958, a bomber was flying over the state when a crew member accidentally pulled the emergency release pin on a nuclear bomb. The bomb, thankfully without its nuclear core installed, plummeted from 15,000 feet and landed directly in the backyard of a guy named Walter Gregg. It blew a 70-foot crater in his garden, destroyed his kid's playhouse, and injured his entire family with the blast from its conventional explosives. When Gregg complained, the Air Force gave him the grand sum of $54,000 for his troubles. It's a truly incredible story where the US government accidentally bombed one of its own citizens and then paid him off like it was a minor fender bender. 24. In American politics, not even death can stop a determined candidate. In 1988, a Republican named Byron Low Tax Looper was running for the South Dakota state legislature. He was a popular guy and a shoo-in to win. There was just one tiny problem. He died of a heart attack about a month before the election. But did that stop his campaign? Absolutely not. His supporters rallied, kept his name on the ballot, and he won the election posthumously by a landslide. He was literally elected as a dead man. The party then got to appoint his replacement, securing the seat. It was a brilliant, if slightly morbid, political strategy, proving that in some parts of America, a deceased candidate with good name recognition is still a more appealing option than a living opponent. 25. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty says no nation can claim ownership of celestial bodies. But a guy named Dennis Hope, a true American visionary, read that treaty and noticed it said nothing about individuals. So, in 1980, he did what any rational person would do. He wrote a letter to the United Nations, declared that he was the new owner of the moon, and started a real estate business. For decades, through his lunar embassy, he has sold millions of acres of moon property to gullible earthlings, complete with fancy, worthless deeds. He's made millions of dollars selling something he has never been to and will never touch. This man is a genius. He didn't just find a loophole. He found an intergalactic loophole and built a business empire on it, proving the American dream is alive and well, even in places with no atmosphere. 26. Today, we worry about concussions in football. In the early 1900s, they worried about the game being a literal death sport. Before helmets and pads were a thing, American football was a brutal, unregulated bloodbath. Formations like the flying wedge were basically human battering rams designed to cause maximum carnage. The violence was so extreme that in the single season of 1905, at least 19 players died on the field from things like broken necks, internal bleeding, and getting kicked in the head. It was less of a sport and more of a public execution with a pigskin. The situation got so bad that President Theodore Roosevelt, the manliest president in history, had to personally intervene, threatening to ban the sport entirely unless they made it less homicidal. 27. Long before it was known for anything else, Cincinnati, Ohio had a glorious, greasy nickname, Porcopolis. In the mid-19th century, it was the undisputed pork-packing capital of the world. The entire city's economy revolved around the hog. There were so many pigs being driven to the slaughterhouses that they would just roam the city streets freely. It was a common sight to see massive herds of swine just chilling on street corners, acting as the city's unofficial four-legged garbage disposals by eating whatever trash they could find. You have to imagine a city where the background noise is the constant oinking of thousands of doomed pigs. It was a glorious, smelly, and slightly terrifying era when one American city was literally built on a foundation of bacon. 28. The 1950s government had a very clear, simple, and hilariously useless plan for surviving a direct nuclear blast. Hide under your school desk. This was the Duck and Cover Drill. An educational film featuring a cartoon turtle named Bert taught an entire generation of children that if they saw a blinding flash of light that could melt steel, their wooden desk would save them. The logic was apparently that a thin piece of plywood was the ultimate shield against a multi-megaton thermonuclear explosion. In retrospect, it's clear this wasn't a survival strategy. It was a way to give kids something to do in the final moments before being vaporized. It's perhaps the most iconic and profoundly dumb piece of Cold War propaganda ever created. 29. You know you're having a bad breakup when you decide to start your own country in your ex's backyard. After the Revolutionary War, a bunch of settlers in what is now eastern Tennessee got fed up with North Carolina's government ignoring them. So, in 1784, they just seceded and formed their own independent nation, the state of Franklin. They elected a governor, set up their own courts, and even tried to get recognized by the federal government. It was a scrappy, independent little country that lasted for about 4 years before it completely imploded due to political infighting, economic chaos, and the fact that North Carolina really wanted its land back. It was a glorious, short-lived experiment in DIY government that ultimately failed, becoming a footnote in history about what happens when your political ambition is bigger than your actual plan. 30. Trying to deliver mail in the Alaskan wilderness in the late 1890s was a nightmare. The solution? Some genius in the government proposed the Reindeer Express. They imported hundreds of Siberian reindeer and hired Sami herders to create a mail route powered by these supposedly hardy animals. It sounded magical, like something out of a Christmas story. The reality was a complete disaster. The reindeer were slow, stubborn, and most importantly, incredibly delicious to the local wolf population. The mail routes were constantly being interrupted by predators, turning the postal workers' transportation into a 4-course meal. The Grand Reindeer Express experiment quickly collapsed, proving that sometimes a cool idea on paper is just a really inefficient way of feeding wolves. 31. In 1896, a railroad promoter named William Crush had a brilliant idea for a publicity stunt. He would stage a real-life head-on collision between 2 full-sized unmanned locomotives. He built a special track in the middle of a Texas field, sold tickets, and a crowd of 40,000 people showed up for the spectacle. The trains were sent hurtling towards each other at 50 miles per hour. The crash was even more spectacular than anyone imagined. Both boilers exploded simultaneously, sending a massive shower of molten metal shrapnel flying into the crowd. At least 3 people were killed, and many more were injured. Crush was fired immediately, but, in a truly American twist, rehired the very next day because the event had generated such massive publicity for the railroad. 32. In 1960, Hollywood unveiled a revolutionary technology that was supposed to change cinema forever. Smell-o-vision. The idea was that audiences wouldn't just see and hear a movie, they would smell it too. During the film Scent of a Mystery, a complex system of pipes would release specific odors to each individual seat in the theater to correspond with the action on screen. The system was a colossal failure. The smells were often released at the wrong time, so you'd be smelling a cigar during a love scene. The odors were faint, hard to get rid of, and many audience members complained that the chemical smells just made them sneeze. The grand debut of Smell-o-vision was also its finale, going down in history as one of Hollywood's most ambitious and stinkiest flops. 33. Hans Langseth was a Norwegian-American farmer who held a world record that no one was really competing for: the longest beard in human history. His facial hair reached a staggering 17.5 feet long. That's longer than a station wagon. He was so proud of it that he would often carry it around rolled up and stuffed in a pouch. But in 1927, Langseth met his end in one of the most absurd and ironic ways imaginable. On the day he died, he accidentally tripped, not over a rock or a stray cat, but over his own colossal beard. He stumbled, fell, and broke his neck. He was literally killed by his own magnificent, floor-sweeping face mane. It's a tragic but also profoundly dumb way to go, proving that sometimes your greatest achievement can also be the thing that ultimately takes you down. His family later cut the beard off his corpse and donated it to the Smithsonian, where it remains to this day as a monument to glorious and fatal excess. So, giant beard deaths, atomic-powered Fords, and postal toddlers. And that's just scratching the surface. The question now, are we smarter than this, or just better at hiding it with Wi-Fi? Drop your hot take in the comments. And if your brain is still intact, prove it. Hit like, smash subscribe, and prepare for more glorious disasters from history.